What's the most NSFW thing you saw go down at work? Story 1. I worked janitorial at a university and was on the early morning shift. It was normally pretty quiet, 4:30 a.m. with few people around. One morning, I went to get onto an elevator and there were two people having vigorous sex. There was that awkward moment of us staring at each other as the door stayed opened for a few seconds and then closed again. I had a good laugh, then went about my work thinking little of it. Fast forward 3 years. I met this girl and started dating her. After a few months, we ended up going on a camping trip and we were going to meet a few of her friends out there. When we arrived at the campsite, there was a second awkward moment as I recognized the couple from the elevator and they recognized me. When my girlfriend introduced us, the three of us almost simultaneously said, "We've met." When my girlfriend asked when and how we met, we just burst out laughing and ended up telling the story. Small world. Story 2. I had to mediate an inter-office issue where employee A refused to interact with employee B in any sense after they had a bad date. This wouldn't be a big deal, but it is. Healthcare and cooperation is necessary. Employee A is furious that employee B walked out in the middle of their date and said that he was humiliated just looking at her. Employee B basically agreed to be professional at work and admitted that she wouldn't have walked out of the date, except she was in shock. At this point, we're a little concerned that whatever shocked her might be a liability to us, drugs, a kiddie porn stash, etc. So we take them and talk to them separately. Employee A has no idea what we're talking about. Employee B wants to be discreet, but eventually tells us, apparently, the date was going well, so they decided to skip the movie and go back to employee A's place after dinner. He pulls a "let me go get more comfortable" while employee B waits in the living room. Employee A comes out in head-to-toe adult baby clothes, diapers included, and hands her a strap-on. In actual baby talk voice, he told her what sex acts he wants her to do to him. His kinks were never discussed beforehand. Let me tell you, taking notes on that entire situation in a way that could be disseminated to the president of human resources was a task. Story 3. I had a coworker that took massive number of drugs on Busey construction sites, to the point he would sway around and barely keep his feet. The company knew but was so desperate for workers, they turned a blind eye and never did anything about it. Shit company. Couldn't keep anybody longer than a year except this guy. Had many close calls on the sites and somehow never died. One day he just drove off to a site in the middle of the day. The company trucks were GPS tracked, so they found him OD'd in it in the shady part of town. Edit. He was very dead when they found him. When I said OD'd in this context, I assumed I did not need to clarify. Story 4. I was working second shift security in a pharma company, and a line worker came out of the boss's office all disheveled. The boss had gone home already, so I kept watching, and two dudes came out of the office a few minutes later. One was still putting his pants back on. They were extremely surprised that the door to her office was on camera. Turns out one of the dudes had stolen a master key from a janitor's cart and had been using the manager's office as a bang pad. Story 5. I've worked at a country club for a long time, and there is always scandalous shit going down. Housekeeper was fucking the maintenance man in the laundry room. A member walked into the bathroom and witnessed a man giving another man a BJ. The beverage cart girl was flashing her new boob job to men for tips. The latest hot-off-the-press story was two coworkers were having a threesome with a member and took pics on his phone. The wife found them, sent them to the GM, and two coworkers fired on the spot. Plenty more stories, but those are the top ones. Story 6. Had a fire drill at work one night. Attendance was taken and two people missing. The couple bosses went back in looking for them. Found them in a storage room having sex. Boss told them to finish up, have a good time, go home, and don't bother coming back. Story 7. Work it for a law firm. You'd be astounded how many times I remote into an attorney's laptop, and he just has a straight-up porn folder on the desktop. When I was a teenager, I put a folder on the family computer's hard drive labeled Dirty Pictures, because we had just got our first internet connection, and my brother and I were warned not to be looking up stuff we shouldn't. I went out and took pictures of any bare spots of dirt I could find and put them on the computer. Now that sounds like an easy prank to you kids today with your USB cables and your smartphones in this future space year of 2021, but back in the dim pre-industrial dystopia that was 1996, it was a little more difficult. I had to take the pictures with this miserable little 110 camera and get the film developed and pay the extra money to send the film off to be scanned onto a CD-ROM by Dark Ages Smiths using hammers and very tiny punches to strike the pits into the CD. After a 3-week wait, I'd go back to the store and get my CD and developed pictures. But Dad's reaction was worth it. I'm glad that I could do something as an idiot teenager that would bring joy to so many random strangers in the future. I keep getting asked why I didn't just Yahoo web crawler Lycos Alta Vista the pictures off the internet. I'll answer. It's worth mentioning that the internet has developed and been a thing for 30 years now. Everyone has the internet in their pocket. And now, you'd get on your phone and look it up. You're looking back through 25 years of personal experience with the internet. But back then, to me, it was completely new. It didn't occur to me that I could just look up pictures of what I wanted. It didn't enter my mind at all because, why would it? I knew how to take pictures with a camera. I knew how to get the pictures put on a CD. I knew how to move files around from the CD to the hard drive. Nobody would have Googled pictures of dirt because Google didn't exist. It certainly wasn't a verb. Imagine you're living around 1880 in the US. You have just moved into a house with electricity. For the first time, it's literally the first week you have lived in this house. Your entire life, when you needed light, you had to have a candle or a lantern. You walk into a dark room in your new house if your first thought to hit the light switch? No, you fumble around for a candle and a match because that's what you have always done. Then once you've done that a few times, you learn to reflexively hit the light switch. Of course, one of your children who has lived with electricity their entire lives wouldn't think of messing around with candles because the light switch is right there. Story 8. First day at a job and out of nowhere, an employee yelled across the office at the boss, "We all know you're cheating on your wife with the secretary." The boss freaked out and started yelling at all of us that his personal life is none of our business. The secretary was crying, and they both left. I was supposed to be training with the boss that day, but because he was gone, we all just went down the street to some Mexican restaurant and drank all day. Pretty cool gig, even if it was very short-lived. Story 9. When I used to work at In-N-Out Burger, the fry girl accidentally chopped off part of her finger using the potato slicer. The entire sink was filled with fires and blood, in which the tip of her finger was floating around. It was quite a spectacle. Story 10. I worked at McDick's way back in the day, talking early zeros. One of the nighttime janitors was named Frankie. He was a Quebecer with a dirty sense of humor, so we got along well. One night shift, I was washing dishes in the back, while Frankie changed one of the grease traps. He slipped on the wet floor and dropped the boiling grease all over himself. This was all directly in front of me, like some of the grease splattered on my shitty vinyl work shoes, ruining them. It was fucked. Never heard somebody scream like that in my life. Literally, hot grease all over him, head to toe. Because it was a grease burn, we had to take all of his clothes off so that it didn't melt into his skin. Pretty sure the 911 operator told us to do this, but it may have been the quick-thinking manager. Anyway, poor Frankie, covered in grease burns, cursing like a bastard, stripped down to his tighty-whities, had to wait for some paramedics to arrive and treat him, and I fucked off out of there a little after midnight. He recovered and eventually became the nighttime manager at a Walmart McDick's. I used to see him all the time afterwards, and he seemed to have recovered well. No scars on his face anyway. Story 11. Cinema usher, end of the night and waiting for final films to finish and clear up. One guy was sitting in the back row. We would be standing at the front to the side, watching the credits. It is not uncommon for this, but the end credits finish, and he is still there. I begin to walk up the stairs towards him, and he hasn't noticed me, and I can make out he looks like he is asleep. As I get closer, he suddenly looks at me and mouths something. Another head pops up from his lap. Another guy had been going downtown with him. I instantly froze, turned around, and walked back down to the exit. They rather sheepishly left a few minutes later. I thanked them for their visit and hoped they enjoyed the movie. Story 12. Co-workers on ecstasy having sex on the prep table in the back at a Subway. We were open until 4 a.m. There was one occasion where a co-worker brought in speakers, black lights, and strobes, and we basically had a rave. We made sandwiches with our shirts off that night for customers. Man, I have a lot of stories from that time. Eat it. Okay, a bit more. My first night on the job there, my co-worker had dropped ecstasy. She was lost with her fingers in the lettuce, swishing them around and staring blankly at it. We made sandwiches around her. Lots of stories about sex. Once had a random customer I'd never met to tell my coworker I was cute, so my coworker sent her around the back and she jumped on me. Zero conversation, just went at it in the back corner. Sex with coworkers in the back, in the bathroom, in the refrigerator, drunk people getting subs for weed or flashing us. One of my favorites was the drunk guy who, while trying to order, thought there was a wall next to him. So he put his elbow up just like this, leaned over, and held the posy perfectly all the way to the ground before he realized he was fouling. There was a schizophrenic guy who would come in all the time and order, talking to the voices in his head all the while but totally responsive to us, polite, friendly. I shit you not, I ran into him like a year after I stopped working there, halfway across the country, sitting next to me in a park. I look over at him as he's talking to himself and my jaw just dropped. I don't know if he thought I was a hallucination or just someone weirded out by talking to himself, but he barely glanced at me. I couldn't get a word out. I just sat there and looked at him for quite a while processing it, then walked away. I was closing one night and had lost the keys to my apartment. So after my shift, I curled up on one of the shelves in the back with a bag of pickle slices as a pillow and slept for a few hours until the opener, my manager, came in. I woke up when the door opened and started to climb out of the shelf, just as she came around the back with all the lights still off and saw a strange form crawling out of the wall. She freaked the fuck out, screamed, and just fell down into a heap on the ground. I felt pretty bad about that one, but we laughed about it later. Had one of the best bosses ever through this whole time, super chill, generous, calm, friendly. As long as we weren't operating at a loss or getting her into trouble, everything was fine. She didn't care how much free food we ate so long as we recorded it on the computer for inventory purposes. That job fed me through college. So this is the end of the story. Tell me what you think about these stories in the comments section. Like and subscribe for more videos.